Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Piano TV. So today we are going to talk about intervals, and we've talked about these on the channel before, but we've never really done an in-depth kind of explanation, tutorial sort of thing on how to identify intervals by ear. And I'm going to show you a couple techniques that I use to do this, but what I mainly want to dedicate this video to is showing you why it is like one of the most useful skills you can learn as a piano player and learn how to develop. So we're going to spend the first half of this video kind of going over why it's so crucial, and then we're going to spend the second half of the video showing you how I do it. So let's get started. First of all, what are intervals? An interval is just the distance between two notes. So if you play a C and a D, the distance is a second, because there's two notes. If you play a C and an E, the distance is a third, because there's three notes, and fourths, and fifths, and so on. And there's two ways you can play intervals. You can play them separately, melodically, or you can play them together, called harmonic. They mean the same thing in that a fifth is a fifth. Whether I played harmonic or melodic, it's still a fifth. So why is knowing intervals so important? There are a lot of reasons, which we'll talk about today, but the most important reason is that they're the main building blocks of melody. If I play a simple melody on the piano, the entire melody is composed of a variety of intervals. So if my ear can tell what's a second, and what's a third, and so on, without really thinking about it, with minimal conscious effort, then I should be able to imitate a melody easily. I'll show you what I mean. So I have Teoria open on my computer right now. We'll talk more about that website soon. And I basically set it up so that it's going to randomly generate a melody. I hope that it's going to pick up on the speakers. I've turned up my speakers loud enough that hopefully it'll come through. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to play back the melody, hopefully accurately, by ear. I don't have any music in front of me. This is done like entirely by ear. So here we go. Something like that, right? I'm not sure if I got all the notes at the end, but that was the gist of it. It was pretty easy. But the point is to develop your ability to discern all those intervals so that it's second nature, so that you don't have to think, okay, wait, was that a fourth? Was that a third? And the main reason we do this, as mentioned earlier, is so that we can easily pick out melodies. Another example of picking out a melody might be if you hear a song on the radio that you like, and maybe you'd really like to figure out the tune on the piano. If interval training is instinctual to you, this is an easy process. So I got a song queued up here. I'm gonna play just like 5 seconds from it so YouTube doesn't yell at me. And then I am going to try to figure it out. My starting note, I think I figured out as a G. So that's kind of the gist of it. I only needed to hear the first few seconds to get the tune in my head, to make sure I was starting on the right note, and then I could basically keep playing the entire song. So it sounds really empty without harmonies thrown in there, but I just want to kind of show you how we do that. And just for full disclosure, I don't think I've ever tried to figure that out before, so that was my first try. Okay, so are you starting to see how useful this is? I don't have any sheet music in front of me, but I could basically spend 5 minutes, figure out the whole melody start to finish, as long as I know what it sounds like in my head, with very few errors. So the main benefit of doing interval training is to allow yourself to be able to play melodies by ear. And not only will you be able to do this on piano, but you're actually inadvertently training yourself for singing as well. Having a really good sense of the distance between notes is what enables good singers to carry a melody without any background music. For amateurs or people who don't really have any vocal experience, even if you botch just like one interval, like maybe you have to jump high like a sixth or something and you only make it up a fourth, that botched interval can end up ruining the integrity of your entire melody. Like maybe it makes you change keys by accident or something like that. And the worst part about it is you probably won't notice most newbie singers don't notice that kind of thing. But if you understand intervals well enough that you can figure out a melody on the piano, then by default, you're also training yourself to figure it out vocally. And I've actually had students who have a harder time figuring out intervals on the piano, but they can do it vocally much, much easier. So maybe you're one of those. So learning how to tell a second apart from a third, apart from a fourth, and then also being able to tell a major third apart from like a minor third or a major second from a minor second. Those are all the teeny tiny building blocks of being able to easily imitate a melody by ear. So interval training is the single most important component of being able to play a melody by ear. So how do you learn intervals? My philosophy is to start teaching intervals right from the first or second year of piano lessons, even if they're simple intervals. And if you're doing RCM exams or ABRSM exams, those are a little different. You're required to know them at a grade 1 level. So with the ABRSM, you don't have to identify 2 intervals beside each other, but you do have to be able to imitate a melody, echo a melody vocally. So it's kind of like learning the same skill set. So what I do with my in-person studio lessons is I try to set aside like 5 minutes per weekly lesson dedicated to ear training. Sometimes that means intervals. Realistically, we probably only get to it a couple times a month, but even that is enough over a long period of time to help train a student's ear. For the first couple years, we'll start simple, just seconds, thirds, fourths, and fifths. And then by the time the students finally finish musical kindergarten and is at the grade 1 level, we'll start incorporating major and minor thirds. And then so on and so on. And then by the time they reach about a grade 8 level, we'll have done all of the intervals, like literally everything up to an octave and all of like the little variations, major, minor, diminished, augmented. So as you can see, it's a pretty slow process. So if you're 7 years old when you're beginning piano, you can expect to be very good at intervals when you're, say, 17. And if you're extra motivated and you do a lot of extra work, like learning how to play pop songs by ear when you're a teenager or something, then you will be excellent at it. But for the most part, it's a really slow process. So then what about the adult student who doesn't want to wait 10 years to be pretty good or excellent at ear training? I do think that you can accelerate this learning process significantly if you want to. I think it's realistic to say that you could be very good at interval training in a year or two if you just dedicate a little bit of time every day. It really is just something that if you're diligent about doing for about 5-10 minutes every single day, I do think that you can get it down well within a year. If you have music lessons, you can always practice intervals with your teacher. But if you want to practice daily at home, I suggest a website like Teoria, which I have loaded up here. So even 5 to 10 minutes a day can make a really, really huge difference in how well you're able to identify them. So we won't do minor thirds or minor seconds. Fourths are, for all intents and purposes, always going to be P4 and P5, fourths and fifths for perfect, just because they can't be made minor. And then I would deselect these ones. So we're just starting with 4 basic intervals here: major second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth. We're not doing any augmented intervals. You can do them going up or down. I like doing both. Melodic means they're played together, harmonic separate. We already talked about that. So you can kind of customize everything. And you can even customize the speed that the examples are played for. You can specify the clef, how many exercises you want to do, and all of that stuff. So my biggest recommendation would be to just start with a few choices, and then once you get really, really good at those, add another interval. And then once you get really good at that, add another one. Instead of doing a whole bunch all at once, you're going to just kind of not be able to retain anything. Once you've got a lot of interval practice under your belt, maybe, I don't know, several months, you can try some practical applications like imitating melodies, which you can do on Teoria as well. But there's an even more intense but really fun and satisfying way to do this, and that's trying to figure out a pop song by ear. So I did this a lot as a kid. I would go online, I'd find the chords to whatever song I was trying to learn, because the chords I'm going to be playing with my left hand so that I'm not just playing like a blank melody with no context. Then what I would do is I would pluck out the melody notes by ear. And when you've never done this before, it can take a really, really surprisingly long time. Like, expect to spend hours on your first attempt. It's hard work, but you will get faster at it, and it's really awesome when you can play one of your favorite tunes on the piano without having ever cracked a music book open. However, caveat, unless you're starting with a naturally good ear and you know it's actually good, I wouldn't jump into learning pop songs right away. I would spend some time with intervals first, just because, as we've talked about, those are the little building blocks of melody, and you don't want to overcommit to something that might be just too difficult for where you're at. And when you're starting to decode pop songs by ear, be really dogged about it. Your first attempt might be a failure. You might find yourself like playing a melody and you're like, oh yeah, I got this down, only to realize that you like changed keys halfway through and it doesn't fit in with the chords anymore. Some people take a lot of time to figure this out, and some people get it almost instinctually. And it's really like roll the dice. We're all different. But the most important thing is that you actually do it. It's trial and error that's going to teach you this skill. It's practical application. It's taking action. You can read about it all you want. You can watch videos about it all you want, but you're really not going to be able to develop the skill without a lot of just like hands-on attempting. Finally, I want to give you a couple tips if you're having a hard time telling the intervals apart. My personal method that some people like and other people don't find helpful at all is this. Learn the pitches of a 5-finger scale. So this means being able to hum or sing a 5-finger scale without error. An exercise like this is something that you would, maybe if you took choir in school or like vocal classes, this is something that you would be practicing, and it's really helpful. So I don't have much experience with teaching people how to sing, but one thing I find when people first learn to sing pentascales, 5-finger scales, is they often get stuck on a half step, which is the 3rd and 4th note. Half steps are difficult to sing at first if you have no vocal training, because the temptation is to kind of accidentally make it a whole step, which messes up the sound of the scale. If I were to give you a vocal example, it would be something like da 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 da, and everything kind of, sorry, I tried. Everything kind of raises up too far, and it ends up sounding unnatural. So if your ear isn't very developed, the problem is you won't necessarily notice you're doing this. But like anything, repetition is key. So what I would do is play a pentascale on the piano and sing along da 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 da. We sing along with it a few times, because most people can tell if they're hitting the right pitch when they sing with something. And eventually, the sound of that half step will burn into your mind. Just make sure you're playing the scale in your vocal range. If I tried to sing a scale down there, it wouldn't work very well. So give yourself a chance of hitting the right notes. Okay, so now that you can sing a pentascale as easy as you can write your own name, a cappella, here's how I use it for interval training. So say this is the interval I need to identify. You can see I'm playing a 4th. I listen to the first pitch, and then the second, and then I try to bridge the difference with a pentascale in my mind. So I hear, and then I hum the tune in my head, and realize that I can fit those 2 tones in between the ones I played. So that's how I know it's a 4th. When I do this, I do it entirely internally, but if it helps you to kind of hum out loud, I find that helps people at first. So once you get the hang of this, you can make it more complicated by adding, say, minor intervals. Say you need to figure this out. A minor 3rd. I hum the pentascale in my head. I notice one tone fits in the middle, so I know it's a 3rd. But when I hum it, it doesn't sound like the major pentascale I so faithfully memorized. It sounds darker. So because of that, I can say, okay, I know this must be minor then, not major. And so on. And once you get the hang of that, you can start getting into wider intervals like 6/7 and octaves, and memorizing the sound of a full scale. Again, this is a process I developed on my own after a lot of years of study. You might find it works for you and you might find it doesn't. I just find that it's very effective for me. It works for me because I have a good sense of pitch. I've spent time developing that, and the results are great. Like every time I do an RCM exam, I either end up with like top marks or like for the ear training component, or very, very close. So hopefully you'll find some use out of that. Then there's the second technique, which works really well for beginners especially, but only at first. It's kind of like a scaffolding. Use it to get the hang of it, and then it becomes burdensome, so you discard it once you figure everything out. So this technique involves associating a melody with each interval. So for example, a second is the very beginning of Frere Jacques, Brother John, I think. Whereas a third can be the opening of When the Saints Go Marching In. There's your third. Okay, and then a fourth is Here Comes the Bride. And a fifth is Twinkle, Twinkle. All right, so I use this approach for students in their first years, but we usually abandon it somewhere around the intermediate stage, just because it's too cumbersome, especially when you have like a million intervals you need to know. And when they start going up and down in their major and minor, it's just way too much to remember. But it's good as a first step. So I usually use it when I'm teaching seconds, thirds, fourths, and fifths for the first time. And you might find it equally useful in your early learning stages. And that is all for today's video. I really hope that you got something useful out of this. At the very least, the one thing that I want you to remember is that ear training and interval training in specific is a really, really important thing to do. And a lot of people, when they're learning piano, just entirely overlook it because it doesn't actually seem that important. But it is, and I hope that I've made that clear in today's video. So thank you so much for watching. Give it a like if you enjoyed it. You can always feel free to comment with suggestions for future video topics. I have like a massive document on my computer with a bunch of your suggestions and stuff like that. I do keep track of them, and I always appreciate that. Catch you in the next video. So my biggest recommendation would just be I'm going to say that again.